Welcome to What Have You, featuring Rachel Jankovic and Rebecca Merkel. This audio is brought to you by Canon Press. It's a special week where Becca and Rachel are joined by the hosts of the Stories Are Soul Food podcast, their brother, Indy Wilson, and editor at Canon Press, Brian Cole. If you enjoy the episode, please go subscribe to the Stories Are Soul Food podcast, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, here we are. We are here for a special thing today. What have you?
No, this is Stories Are Soul Food hosting the legends of What Have You.
Or maybe we're hosting you.
No, you're in my building.
We'd have to be in a car to be hosting you all. But
Next
Becca,
time-
let's just try to do a takeover.
Yeah.
Welcome back to What Have You?
Yeah, you can do that. So here's a question. Are you guys releasing this as an episode of What Have You?
Yes,
That's
because
what
we
we
gave
did.
you our one slot
There we
for
go.
recording.
This is a co-hosted
The mashup.
episode.
Yep.
Co-hosted. This is like the Marvel comic book universe at this
Whoa.
point.
You're right.
Wow.
We are bringing
This is
What Have You and
Batman
Stories Are Soul
versus
Food.
Superman. Batman versus
That's
Superman.
DC,
Oh,
my
sorry.
friend.
My
And
bad.
that's DC. So
How about What Have You is soul food? That's
stories are What Have You.
Oh, it works in all directions.
Nice, but we do really have to do the names.
Also, stories are soul. What Have You actually kind of works well too.
There we go.
Much depends on the story.
So, for those of you who listen to Stories of Soul Food, we are joined today by my sisters, Rebecca Merkel and Rachel Jankovic.
Yep.
Or Jankovic. Either one works. Both get.
Nate's flexible.
Yeah, I'm flexible, and I've noticed that. So are
Yeah,
the Janks.
we are also. We go by the Jenks. Anything, we'll answer to it.
I don't really hear many people say Jankovic,
Mm-mm.
but
They
it
say
is technically Jankovic, is it not?
I don't know. We say Jankovic, but unless people, it's like a meter thing. They'll say the Jankovic family reunion, or I'm a
Uh-huh.
Jankovic.
Mm,
We
Okay.
just say Jankovic in our little branch.
Kamala.
Yeah, we do it all ways.
Yeah, all the
Still
ways.
haven't
I
found
was
that one
thinking.
out.
I was thinking. Obviously, the three of us, we've all known each other our whole lives,
We've all
True.
known each other for all of Brian's life.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and we've known whichever ones of us were present.
Since I was in the
for-
5th grade and Becca was in the 7th grade and Rachel was in the 3rd grade when Brian was born.
yep.
Oh, you remember that?
Yeah, I was in his dad's
'Cause-
class.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
That's pretty exciting.
So we've all known Brian.
And Brian's dad, Nate, taught both Nate and I 5th grade. Did you ever teach Brian? Oh, you missed
But
it.
I
Ben
missed
did.
out.
Didn't
Yes.
Ben teach you?
Yeah.
Yep. I've had much Hebrew from Mr. Merkel. Dr. Merkel, I guess we say.
Yeah. Doctor. Call me doctor.
Call me Doctor. Dr. Benjamin.
Yeah, so we are joined on Stories Also Are Soul Food by my sisters, Rebecca Merkel, Rachel Jankovic, and we are joining them on What Have You. I'm
Yes.
Nathan Wilson, Andy Wilson. This is Brian Cole.
Yeah.
We are both crashing What Have You. We're
Think
going to talk about stories
We've
today.
really established how many of us are in the room
There's
now.
4 of us.
We've covered it.
Voice recognition, that's Rachel talking.
Okay.
If someone's laughing but not speaking, it's Becca.
Well,
If
You're
someone's
right.
drinking, it's Brian.
and next time we're going to make you two come and sit in my back seat.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
For the actual what
So
We
what
can
are we
do it
what
that
are we
way.
talking about today, Brian?
We're talking about, how to acquire books for your children. The home library, although that sounds
This
so.
feels like a terrible idea.
You
Who
think
came
so?
up with this topic?
I came up with this topic.
I love the idea of you asking this because I never answer people's questions about this because it would be much easier to just
Yeah.
talk about it than to type out a little.
So Rachel
response.
approves. We're doing it. We've moved and seconded. It's happening. Let's do
well,
it.
I assumed it was already settled before I joined in, but
No, it's settled for sure.
Okay.
So how to acquire books.
Yeah, I feel like it's a little bit like trophy hunting, and when you find a good one, you put it on the
Mhm.
wall, and then everyone looks at it and they want to know what books you have. That's my metaphor.
Okay.
So I used it right at the beginning.
So, there we go.
I will say that I do not like to deal with libraries because I felt like we would end up owing way too much money to a library. It couldn't deal with that in my life. So, and also,
Libraries are free.
yeah, but we would ruin and destroy books that we lost. And the other factor is if you don't know anything about the book, it's like if you genuinely have no idea of the book, there's so much filth in kids' books that it's like you do actually need to be researching what you'd be bringing home from the library.
Although,
Anyways.
if I could jump in there, I remember when we were kids, Dad would, on most Saturdays, he would take us out somewhere, and it was often to the library. And we were allowed to go look around through the books, but we always had to take them to him when we were little, and he would preview it, and he would say, "Now we're gonna, send that one back," or "Yeah, you can check this one out," or whatever. But it was a careful previewing when we were little because there is a lot of junk.
But that was, I would say though, that the libraries have gone further and further down the tube. Like when we were kids, it was like, there was dumb books for kids, but nothing like the just open like propaganda as there is now. I feel like now if you took your kids to the library, you're signing them up for a little evil preview of
But I do
things.
think that back when we were kids, it was, the propaganda was there, but it was sneakier, which I think is why it was even wiser of Dad to double check those things, because it was all there. It was just not as in your face as
now they've got the rainbow on the cover.
It was less obscene. It was more subversive. Right. Now there's more obscenity in the library, and at the time there was just more rot.
Yeah. Back in the library, it was all just kids hating on their parents. As opposed to, I have two mommies sort of approach.
Yeah, and but the reason I was saying that is that my big advice, if you have I have 7 kids. So when our oldest just started reading chapter books, I had that kind of like, okay, I should start accumulating some books. And then it was like all of a sudden I had 4 kids who were voracious readers. And I was just like, I'm not ready. I'm not prepared. How do you buy enough books to keep up with this many children? And that is actually a lot of work to get enough books in your house for that many kids. It's not, for the kind of readers we wanted them to be, it's not like we want them each to own 5 books. We wanted them to really have access to a lot more books than they could even get through. And that actually takes a commitment to have things in your house. It is a bigger commitment than a lot of people want to make to their kids being good readers.
It is also, I've had different phases in my life where I have a huge quantity of books just coming into my house by default. So it would take a lot of effort for me to stop the flow of books.
Sort of like China nowadays.
So there would be, the sales guys at Random House loved my kids. And so they would load up huge boxes of every offering, from the entire Random House empire. And those would show up on my doorstep, and the kids would tear into those and find many amazing and wonderful things that these guys had sent, and many things that we would be like, maybe not. But then also the blurb stuff. So ARCs, like advanced readers copies and galley copies, would just show up. And so there were always stacks and stacks and stacks of books around.
That's sort of
and it became problematic. It was lucky, but it also had downsides. So, many, many times we have many war stories in our family of kids reading books ahead of schedule, books that I would not have had them read. In fact, one of my teenagers, I now have 4, one of my younger teenagers just started a book, and it's like, oh, well, I did an event. I was at an event with this author in, back east, and it was a big deal. And they, inscribed this book, and it would have been rude for me not to take it when they gave it. And it's this, huge award-winning big shot novelist. And I bring it home, and there it is. And it's addressed to their father. And they look in there, and on the title page, it's like somebody's inscribed this to their dad. And so they start reading. And oops. And that's happened. I think one of the first books I burned, I actually just threw in the fire, was one of those where I was at an author event where I had to sign a bunch of stuff, and somebody else signed a book to me. And I was like, oh, thank you. But I was on my way to the airport, and I tucked it into my satchel and brought it home with me because I hadn't hit a trash can, and I failed to review it. And it was probably the worst book any of my children have ever read as far as evil goes and horrible subversion and darkness.
What kind of evil are we talking here?
Incest.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
No. Burning it was.
Yeah. It's like a memoir of an extremely damaged teenager.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Oh man, see.
Or a horrible survivor's memoir where anyway, that kind of thing. And it's anyway, I just smiled.
That's not what I recommend you have in your home library.
So no, we have, but basically the thing is, so we've always had a kind of an odd situation and we've gotten a better grip on it, but that's the case for everybody. So it can feel like it's just more visible. I get physical copies of books that just float through my house. And, they arrive in the mail and they sit there waiting for someone to look at them. And I haven't looked at them yet. And I've got a little vacuum cleaner of a child, who's reading. That's happened a lot, but that's not unique. It feels unique to me or to authors, but it's not. If you have Overdrive, if you have library apps on your phone, if you have Kindles, if you have iBooks, if you have any of that, then all of the books in the entire world are there kind of floating by.
See, here I was feeling envious and
with less visibility.
There's no need for envy.
But there's less visibility, so I can at least see like, wait, what are you reading or what's going on?
Yeah.
Put that one back. No, that one's going in the fire.
Do your kids Overdrive? Rachel, Becca?
No, Lena could, I guess. Our oldest has more access to other things. We have Kindles, but with they can't shop on their Kindles. They have what we put on the Kindles is on there. They're limited for our younger kids. But I think that having actual copies of books, this is a pet peeve of mine that I have with everyone wanting to be minimalistic, is that like I have a huge shelf full of craft books, which are not things I need and not like they're kind of obscure, random, however I came into that. But I keep them because I actually love the like Saturday afternoon kid reading a book on some random thing but I don't want them drifting around the internet checking if there's any interesting tidbits. Having hard copies of things for them to explore and learn in is actually really important to me, that it not just be, and I was like, would it be nice to not have to have all of this stuff in my house? Messing stuff up? Yeah, but is there a huge, what you were talking about, there's a real exchange of knowing what it is that they're looking at, knowing what, like, this is a thing.
Well, it's visible. It's visible to everybody.
Like shopping in a limited amount. I mean, having enough that there's stuff for them to grab, but not having it be everything in the universe at your fingertips. I remember when I was a kid, that's like, I would be bored. There's the bookshelf.
We'd go.
There's only those books,
and we'd loiter in the encyclopedias. Just being like, wonder what's up.
That's how I ended up reading some obscure Kipling things or whatever. Because you just like pull it out, and it's like, well, I guess I'll read this then. And I think that that's a really important thing.
And sometimes books, like I would do a lot of thrift store book shopping. So I used to just routinely, when I would be at the grocery store, I'd stop at a thrift store that was near Walmart, Goodwill, and just run in and scan the shelves for different things I was looking at. And I would keep notes on my phone of series, like what numbers we didn't have in some series.
I think that's where we have to go. We have to get specific on the series. That will answer all the questions.
So one that I love is the Redwall books, which I love partly because it's like a square acre of reading. And there's so many of them. And it just goes, but not all of my kids have loved Redwall. And sometimes what you were talking about, where they have been avoiding it for some reason for a while. And then one day comes where they're like, fine, I'll just read a Redwall. And then they're like gone for 3 weeks deep in the woods of Redwall reading all of these. Yeah. And the thing, actually, this is a random aside because I just found this out and I loved it. That I actually can't remember how to say his name. Ryan Jakes, who wrote Redwall. That he was a milkman in England who delivered milk to a blind kids' school. And he wrote Redwall for the blind kids that he delivered milk to. That whole series which actually makes sense because, there's like the Redwall cookbook and it's really big on smells and flavors and stuff all through Redwall. But he was writing for blind kids, which I totally love that. Like,
yeah, that's great.
But not all my kids have jumped into those right away, but it's a ton of them. And sometimes they've come back.
Yeah. And it is great. I actually find that I frequently hand kids a hard book. We have a lot of graphic novels right now around, or Calvin and Hobbes is super easy to go to.
Yeah.
It's always, I'm just going to read something and be amused. But I'll always try to stretch them a little bit and try to take the walls off of the genres. I was making my kids read Raymond Chandler fairly recently. And some of the older ones who are very surprised. Like, they're very surprised by this world of,
noir.
Yeah,
LA
but just
noir.
kind of like, this is really interesting. It's old enough that it's very PG-13. You know, it's not thematically. There's some dark elements thematically, but it's never gratuitously descriptive.
Right. Yeah.
And yet the voice and the narration and the prose is all phenomenal. And we've starting in like 5th, 6th grade, we have fed the kids PG Woodhouse.
Right. It's like,
massive quantities. And
that's
like
important.
Redwall.
You got to get that in there.
So Redwall is an example of something that's fun, and there's a bunch, but it's also like, it's a time passer. You're not rotting your brain. You're having fun. You're imagining stuff, but it doesn't stretch you or challenge you depending on how old you are.
Depending on your age,
a little kid could be stretched. But I've seen a lot of kids in larger homeschool families stunted. And I've seen in reading families, I've seen a lot of them stunted where they're still doing laps through little kid books.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the worst offender? Is that what happens if you read just Henty?
Yeah.
That sort of approach? Okay.
Yeah. So Henty's super fun. That's a really, really fun, like junior high boy, especially thing. And you can just kind of do laps. I read through the Landmark series, which was an old, a lot of very historical fiction.
I found those all for my kids, and nothing makes me happier than finding someone reading like combat nurses of World War II.
Yeah. So the Landmark series is like Wild Bill Hickok.
Yeah. It's just everything.
These
fur trappers.
Yeah.
There was one book called Midshipman Lee at the Naval Academy.
I remember that.
I did a lot of laps through that one.
Nice.
I like that one.
I did Hunters Blaze the Trails over and over. But then the more I learned about them, the less I realized the truth was in that book.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where when I meet a college freshman, a high school senior who's really into Henty, that is sad. It's just sad. And it's like, that was great food. Good job. Well done, you. Back then, grow.
Okay, so for the metaphor, that's because it's like meeting an adult whose favorite food is fish fingers. That sort of thing. Is that sort of what you're going with?
Yeah, and I have nothing wrong with fish fingers, and there's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with it. But there are people who decide to never grow in their taste or sophistication.
I would say that this goes two ways, because if you're not discerning with the things they start with, graduating higher and higher will just get worse and worse.
100%. There's no question. But we've talked about the, you don't want them to ever just be a vacuum cleaner. Like, even though they're in more of a vacuum cleaner baby bird phase, they have to be able to engage with what's true or false or good or bad about what they're reading, and their tolerances for what's good and bad will increase and should increase. So their sophistication. So they could be very early. They're just saying so and so had a bad attitude. Like Mossflower was rude to someone. And then you keep dialing it up, and you're like, man, this Raymond Chandler stuff, by the time I'm 15 or 14 and I'm reading The Big Sleep, like, there's more to process. There's moral dilemmas and things to process, but it goes wrong the other way. Most of the culture, and most of our culture, people are encountering too much darkness too young.
And then not having anyone to guide them, talk through it, because I think that's the thing of just letting them read, and the parents have no idea what they're reading, and they don't teach them how to engage with it, so they're encountering darkness.
Or the parents don't know what they think of it.
Right.
So,
or side note real quick, parents are quite hypocritical about it, where the parents in their own entertainment standards, they're not engaging with the darkness. They just consume more of it because they think I'm an adult, so now I consume more bad stuff. In my own personal Netflix show or whatever my favorite show is, I consume more darkness, and so I'm okay with them consuming progressively more and more darkness, as opposed to engaging and resisting and pushing back.
Totally.
But anyway.
Well, Becca, you along those lines, isn't that what you teach the kids to do in classical lit, for example? Because I've heard, haven't there been huge flame fires at Logos over Ovid, for example?
Yeah, Ovid is one that I think is fantastic for that exact thing, where you do have, by the time we're most of the way through, and we do the metamorphoses, that's the one of Ovid. I should clarify.
Yeah, not ours.
Not just
exactly.
Not just every Ovid.
Not all of Ovid, but that one is like where everybody's about 3/4 of the way through it, and they just look a bit ill, and they're sort of like, why are we reading this? Or having to explain to parents,
and
why
this
are
is
you
juniors,
reading
right?
this? Yeah, juniors.
Okay.
Yeah, 16 and 17-year-olds.
Yeah. And it is trying to, walk through it carefully. How do you think about this like a Christian?
Right. Yeah, because you would say, I mean, well, what did you say when that came up as, why are we reading this? Like, why do you read Ovid? Something that's so full of, there is some incest in Ovid.
Indeed.
Or the Old Testament.
There is.
Exactly.
Well, that's the thing is there's nothing in Ovid that is more, it's not like it's pornographic. There's dark stuff, but it's dark like the book of Judges can be dark. It's just that it isn't the Bible and it's written by pagans. And so you do have people with like, why on earth are we wading through this? And then, of course, there's the classic answers about, all of Christian lit is really built on knowing the classics. If you want to understand Milton or you want to understand Spencer, you really have to have read the classics first. There's that stuff. But I think I do get a lot of students who have come into classical lit having read Percy Jackson, or they've read, what's that, D'Aulaire's book of myths, that big yellow one. And so they come into class thinking, I really love mythology. They know, they know
such a
how
bad
big fan of mythology.
Love those Greek gods.
I think if you just let your kids do the little fairy tale-y versions of the myths, and they think it sounds so fun, and it's all like golden Arcadia, and there's monsters and
it's all
fabulous
foot races.
Things. Yeah,
it's all foot races for golden apples.
And the thing is, I think if you just let your kids do that kind of mythology, it's like only showing them the fun side of cocaine addiction. Because it's like, this.
And we can all speak to the fact there is a fun side.
Well, the thing is that like, this is idolatry and it's dark and these people were in bondage. And it really is heavy. Like
these are the demons that ruled over mankind for quite a while.
So they come in thinking like, oh, I love mythology. And then they start encountering actual mythology. And it's like, you really have to reckon with what idolatry and paganism really was like. And I think that's hugely healthy for the students to have to.
So my son, my oldest, because he's not normal and is currently studying Nez Perce.
I know.
And so
it's amazing.
On the Sabbath, he was over there grinding away in this like 3,000 page Nez Perce dictionary. And I was saying, Rory, is this rest? And he was like, yes, it is. This is not my schoolwork. I'm doing this for fun.
Mm-hmm.
So he's been reading legends, Nez Perce legends in the native language.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, I read a few of those.
And it's kind of funny because he's really enjoying reading them in the actual language, but also
did not do that.
but he's also, but the other thing that's hilarious is how they're exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same kind of story.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Like there's actually, there's differences of personality and stuff, but it's as a story starts, if you've been in any fairy tale, any myth that's not Disneyfied,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
If you remove the Disneyfication of mythology, and you've read German fairy tales and you've read Persian myths.
That's always a real downer when you did that as a kid. You're like,
whoa.
oh, Grimm's fairy tales. I should read one
they
of those.
chopped her toes off.
I love stories about people who lose their feet.
That's really weird.
Dismembered wives in boxes.
Witches eating children. Witches eating children, and the bodies in the boxes. And
right.
So then you read Nez Perce stories, and it's kind of like, this is out of Ovid. And that was Rory's big comment is, these stories, these tribal stories, are straight out of Ovid. They were dealing with the same kinds of, weird psyche, mythical psyche that existed elsewhere. The darkness is similar with different props and settings.
I do want to say something here because I think that this is maybe the foundation of what we were talking about, how you want your kids to grow up in some things. You don't want to be overly protective, and you want to be protective enough that they're learning it.
Yeah. And you want them to have a habit of talking to you about it.
Yes.
You want them in the habit of engaging.
I feel
with
like
others.
this is time for me to vent about an issue that upsets me every time, but it comes up pretty often because I'm obviously involved in the Bible reading challenge. How often Christian women ask other women what it's safe to let your children hear from Scripture.
Yep.
And that, I think, is the baseline that you have to accept that all of Scripture is appropriate for every human. Like that this is okay. It doesn't mean that when I read a Bible story,
we're far more Victorian than we realize.
Way more. We're totally trying to put skirts on the piano legs of Scripture to keep our kids from, like really weird.
That's a weird reference. You should explain that.
The Victorians did that. They were so concerned about sexual illusions of table legs and piano legs.
Oh, okay. So the leg
they put
has a leg.
It has a leg, so legs are inappropriate.
They would put skirts on them to keep everyone from getting lewd. And but
those sofas, jeepers.
Meanwhile, while having horrific syphilis problems, so they were really not nearly as holy as they made.
Actually, go hand in hand.
They do
If you're stressed out about a table,
you're lascivious to the core at that point. Yeah. but my point is, everybody thinks we're being safety patrol officers. When if you're actually trying to be like, oh, this isn't okay for my children to hear. There's a lot of stuff that we've explained to our kids at an age appropriate level because they met it in scripture. Because they're like
of your father's fifth grade class, that one brought a lot of conversations.
Talk about the birds and the bees.
They're reading through Genesis.
Yeah.
Right.
And so then they do come home with some questions and you're like, oh, did you read that?
That is in the inspired word of God. It is.
And then you do have to have those conversations, but I do think it's...
Or your kid's just like, what's harlotry? And you're like, well...
It's a metaphor.
Harlotry is ... Like you just have... But the reality is we just made a commitment as a family. We would never flinch from anything that was in scripture.
And
we're not hiding them.
To get into
we're not being like, guys, we're going to do a deep study on Lot's daughters right now. We didn't do that, but we didn't hide it from them and we never protected them from it. Just like in the sermons that they sit and listen to, there will be references about pornography and things well before they have any concept of what that even is.
I had I think it was a big GHC conference.
I think so.
Talking to a couple of moms afterwards who, after I gave one of these stories or soul food talks about how you have to calibrate your kids with scripture, and they build up their muscles, their narrative muscles, and their resistance and their maturity with scripture and Bible stories. A couple moms told me afterward that they have strictly forbidden their children from reading the Old Testament. The Old Testament is off limits, and their kids get in trouble for it. And my response was less than cool.
That
I think my exact words were, "Who do you think you are?"
Amen. Like, how dare you?
And it's like you're now as bad as any tyrant in the Reformation, trying to keep God's word from people. No, you may not have it in English.
And also, you're totally being a nasty pope yourself because no doubt your own standards are not that pure. You're only applying this in one weird place.
My children may not read the Old Testament. I, however, throw Breaking Bad parties.
Yeah, I love it.
My friends.
It's really edifying. It's really edifying for me.
Yeah, that's not necessarily the case for those mothers.
No.
They were actually in over shelter mode.
Yeah.
So they had, teenagers who
sin doesn't come from within us.
Right. But they were.
It's like panic, right? Because it was too late.
Yep. And so it's panic and things are going bad. And so I can't tell you how many parents I've talked to who said, we only allow G-rated, we only allow G-rated films. And you have 16-year-olds. It's like they have to get their sea legs under them. They have to actually.
It is like basically saying, my firm approach is to never teach my children to swim because I know that when they are 18 to 20, they're going to be out in the ocean by themselves. So what I'm going to do is never teach them
swimming skills.
Water is scary.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to take them by surprise completely.
But I do think I do think one of the things that is important about this, though, is that there's a genre of kids lit, which is what you were saying Redwall is, which I agree. I think Redwall is this, which is basically just roughage. Basically, like you're reading, you just need more stuff to read. Read more stuff. It's the giant
bag of baby carrots that you're allowed to hit between meals.
Eat it, guys. Go for it. Have it. Eat it. And but there's actually not enough great literature for children to not also have roughage in your home. And so I have things around the house that are not
it's excellent. Okay. It is okay to have Christmas dinner and have books that are like that.
And have box mac sometimes.
Yeah, to have box mac, and it's okay to have a lot of grilled cheese in your childhood and PB&Js. Totally. And then to still have birthday dinners, Christmas dinners, Sabbath dinners, things like that, where no, it's not all equal. So there's a lot of just roughage.
And the contrast is hugely important too, though, because if you raised a kid, like you were saying, fish fingers is their ultimate standard of cuisine, that's sad. But if you had somebody who can't ever have anything that's not Christmas dinner, you've just raised the snob. So it's like actually having full contrast.
I have loved
is really
when my
great.
kids come to me with a book, and I'm trying to think of which one this happened with, but it was really funny to me because it was like a kid who was probably deep in the throes of like reading the Hardy Boys and, reading that kind of thing. And then they were reading, I think it was maybe Woodhouse, but them coming to me like, Mom, this guy writes really well. Like where they could tell from their own experience that this is a far better, is superior.
There's some flavor here.
We had a similar thing that cracked me up because it was an acquaintance who had written a book, had given a copy to us. So it had come into our home that way. And Judah was young. Like, I don't know, he was probably 4th grade maybe or something. And he picked it up and was reading it. And I said, oh, how is that? Well, and he didn't know who the author was, anything. Yeah. He was like, I feel like he's never written a story before.
I've had some kids give brutal reviews.
That was the case. So I felt like it was amazing.
Like, oh, so amazing. But what I was going to say is, in the genre of crazy roughage that you're buying, I do think parents need to be attentive to that. Like, for instance, one example I can remember is when Lena, our oldest, when I was noticing we didn't have enough books, I bought a box set of Angelina Ballerinas at the Costco because I was like, well, here's a bunch of books she can look at. And then we threw them away one by one as I was gonna read them to her. I was like, what the heck is this horrible story? Like, and they really were. But I think we ended up with, like, out of the whole box set, keeping like maybe 3 of them that were in different levels of.
So horrible. Why? Because we're not in shelter mode for Angelina Ballerina, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I am. Fully.
No, here's the thing. She's a nasty, nasty little selfish mouse. But the story presents her as clearly the person you're supposed to identify with no criticisms of her very evil selfishness. So, like, the one, I mean, I can remember one of them we got to, she finds out she's going to have a brother or sister, and she's so mad that or her mom's pregnant, I suppose. And she's locked in her room, like, and it's a picture of her holding the door shut while her parents are like pleading with her from the outside. She throws a lamp in her like anger about having a sibling. But the resolution is everyone assuring her that she's still their favorite child right now. You're still our dearly beloved princess who's magnificent. There's no comment on it. Was like her poor feelings had to be, I was just like, this is not even worth this is not worth having in the house from, like, this is just stupid. Or later there's one where she wants to be the star of the ballet show and someone else gets the part and she's super mad about that.
Happened to the best of us.
Yeah, but it goes on. It wasn't quite a Tanya Harding story, but it basically amounts to the resolution.
Angelina Tanya Harding.
Yeah, exactly. But the resolution is that the person who was supposed to be the star of the show sprains her ankle. So good news, Angelina gets to be the star of the show. And to me, it was like the author does not understand anything about goodness or like. I just was like, no. But clearly,
like, Angelina gets the SWAT.
Well, that's what I actually remember that being Lena's commentary, where we're like reading along, and I turn the page, and I'm like, well, and she's like, she needs some spanking, and I'm like, mm-hmm. And
see, that's an example of a kid engaging actually at that level.
But because of the nature, what I'm trying to say is because the nature of those books was not something I intended to be walking through with them. It was supposed to be pictures for them to look at and things for them to do. I'm like, this is not worth having this kind of insidious garbage in the house. Wow, that's all I meant. Is that each phase there's the kind of roughage, but you have to be loosely aware of what.
So if we're going to talk about good series to have around your house, if you have a bunch of kids, then I would say one of the challenges is, as parents, you have to be readers yourself. And even if you're in a busy, busy place where you're not reading as much as you once did, you need to have read, you need to have taste, you need to kind of be able to set mile markers of growth for your kids. But Redwall is a great series to have around. It is a really great, and there's so many. There's a lot. There's a lot of stuff. Lloyd Alexander, I felt like should always be around.
I have a lot of him in my house.
Yeah, a lot of Lloyd Alexander.
I actually found Enid Blyton. Enid Blyton was a prolific English author that's a ton of stuff. It's like Nancy Drew level, but she's more clever, I think, by like reading level. And we have a bunch of her series. She was so prolific that it's like we have the Famous Five, the Secret Seven, the adventure books. I think there's one that's the Magic Faraway Treehouse that we have. And so we probably have like 60 Enid Blyton.
Yeah, we
books.
kind of discovered the Famous Five first because we were living in England, and then they were readily available. And here they're harder to come by, but
we
Famous
those.
Five, and then Swallows and Amazons was another one that we found when we were there. Aside from obviously Narnia, I mean, gotta have
and Narnia for me, that's like the Christmas dinner stuff, where it's like, okay, Narnia is fantastic. It's okay to read Lloyd Alexander and have it not be Tolkien or Lewis, but it will remind you of aspects of them, and it will have moments of wisdom and moments of like, you know. Susan Cooper has some things like that.
We like the...
You should always have Tintin.
Is it Edward Eager, the magic ones, or the...
Yeah, Magic by the Lake.
Those are fun. That series is really fun. So that is a series that my kids enjoyed them so much that what you were saying, I'm like, I have a lot going on, but I did stop to read a couple of those to see what is this about. And this other series that I listened to is my older kids read The Thief by Megan Whalen Turner.
Yep.
So that series I listened to because I knew my kids and because they were like, this is really good. Yeah. And I wanted to know if I agreed with them that it was really good. Like that they'd read something I had no knowledge of. And I did agree with them that I thought it was really good. And there was plenty to talk about in the book.
There's plenty of things.
What is going on here? What's the author doing? Do you think that's right?
What's the first book?
I think it's The Thief, but there's a lot of them. The Queen of Atolia.
King of Atolia, then they struggle differently. They have different
But
there's different issues.
My point is,
I love
having
having
to have the kids read them, and we talk about those. And
I love having my kids have opinions about which one's the best and why, and which characters are weaker.
Totally. And what is so well done about this, and why do you like it, and what's going on? So that's a series that I read because my kids liked it first. That I was like, all right, I'll catch up with you.
And Tintin. You said Tintin.
Tintin. We
stacks of Tintin around.
Had stacks of those. Yeah, it was in multiple formats. I feel like we had some of the hardback that had a bunch of them in it, and then just the little ones.
I have somebody in my family who would prefer, he's in that age range where he would prefer to just be reading Calvin and Hobbes or Tintin or Asterix or Farside or whatever. Yeah. That age range. And I don't mind it. I just don't want it to stop there. So I'm I love that you like this, but you can't just kind of be at the end of what you do, which is, so for Christmas, I bought some of the elite literature. It was called like Extreme Adventures.
Right.
It's like the crocodile or the scorpion. And
we did great battles for boys. That's the one we did.
Good. Yeah. Well, but it's totally barely a step up from like it's, and the funny thing is, I love it when you're like, you feel like you're laying a trap and then you see the child off pouring over their extreme scorpion adventure. And you're like, yes, we have done it. We have done the thing now. But a big part of it, they have to learn that they can get through a chapter book in not very much time. Like they just have to, it's like something that can be kind of, it sounds like more work than they feel like doing or whatever. So some of those are not, I feel like we have some. Oh, Enid Blyton, we also have mystery ones of hers, which are more like mystery
We're
series.
jumping age range, but Nesbitt, or jumping around, all of us are. But
I have my kids
just
started going through a lot of Agatha Christie's. And
we have a lot of those.
And my older kids have all done laps through P.D. James.
Yeah.
Which is, they're heavier.
Mm-hmm.
It's darker because you're like, it's crime, it's dark crime. And but I think I have one teenager, a 16-year-old, who's done all of P.D. James at this point.
Well, P.D. James is so biblically literate, even though she is not.
The only P.D. James, maybe I've read two of them. The first one that I read of hers, I thought was a whole lot of nothing. So I haven't been inspired to buy more of them.
Which one?
I feel like it has sin in the title. It was recommended to me from someone. But it was a very gay crime, and it was just gnarlier than I want to be like, hey, teenagers, why don't you all dive in?
Same girl, she was reading Brideshead Revisited, and I was like, how about? And that's just, it's not.
I still remember
that was more just that's.
I
just
still
so
remember Dad
so
being
sad.
like, Rachel, are you reading Gone with the Wind? And I was like, yes, I am. And he was like, why? Like having this discussion, and whenever it was, I was like, I just felt like I needed to know what happens in Gone with the Wind. And he was just like, carry on, you know? And I just remember this, like, I felt like I should have known this by now, so I'm going to read it. And I did. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're probably getting close to the end, but I thought one question might be, you've been talking in terms of teaching someone to swim or teaching someone to have taste. What is the goal for a reader? That might be helpful to loop back around. Like, what do you want out of your children? Obviously, I've got 8 and under, but looking forward, we've been talking some older books, some of the older teen years. What do you want your kids to be doing based on what they're reading? What are you training them for?
I think I'm going to end up misquoting this, but it was Lewis who said that literature exists to teach what is useful. To you know the quote that I'm talking about. To delight in the. I'm going to pull it up. You guys keep talking.
I'm going to quote Sydney while you look up Lewis. Is poesy is the art of imitation, etc., etc. For so Aristotle termeth it in the word mimesis. Hold on, guys. Sorry. Representing, counterfeiting, figuring forth, to speak metaphorically, a speaking picture, with this end to teach and delight. And I think that that's the piece that to both teach and delight, because you have like the Oscar Wilde and the aesthetic movement where it is not to teach, it is only to delight. End of story. And I think that is such a dead end. And then if you have only teaching, it's dry and difficult and, nobody's that interested. So I feel like to teach and delight is kind of the key. I think those two things have to go together.
Food, that's just the food metaphor again, because what's food for? Like, well, why did God make food the way he did? It's like we try to take pleasure in it. It should delight.
It keeps you alive, right?
Yeah, to edify, to sustain, to strengthen. But also, it shouldn't just be protein soup.
No, and I just, like, you want the kids to be delighted enough to pursue it, but you want them to be taught so that they can go out into the world equipped to handle it like the characters in the stories handled it,
Yeah. Okay, I found the quote. Literature exists to teach what is useful, to honor what deserves honor, to appreciate what is delightful. The useful, honorable, and delightful things are superior to it. It exists for their sake. Its own use, honor, or delightfulness is derivative from theirs. And I would say that you want your kids to have a palate for what's honorable and what's delightful and what's true and what's whatever. And we were talking about one other author that I do have I have Beverly Cleary. Yeah. And the thing with Beverly Clary is I don't agree with her on a lot of, like, when she makes characters are kind of fighty with each other. Now it's like things that I wouldn't want my own children doing or behaving like that. Or like Dear Mr. Henshaw is a really sad book about a boy whose father has left him. And it's a really sad book. But I've actually loved having every one of my early readers read those, because it troubles them, like, because they actually are kind of like, this is heavy, like this. And so I have always used that as a time to talk with them about how their own life is so safe, but many kids that you see at the park are living in worse situations than that, like broadening their own understanding of what's going on in the world. It does actually heighten their own love of being in fellowship, being in it heightens things that we want them to be aware of.
Yeah,
that's good.
I feel the same way about James and the Giant Peach.
Okay.
Just be grateful that you didn't roll away in a peach.
I do not like Roald Dahl gives me the creepers.
I actually like some of his stuff and not some of his other stuff. But I do like Roald Dahl.
I feel sinister about him, like Alice in Wonderland.
He was a miserable person to be around.
Really?
Yeah.
It feels like the creepiness of Alice in Wonderland to me. Like that, like something is not right here, and I don't like to think about it.
I've never heard that, but
I'm not accusing him of that. I'm saying something's not right. But
and Alice in Wonderland is
there.
still pretty phenomenal.
No doubt. I just have a low tolerance for that one. Yeah.
So I guess the question is not, people can be focused on what do I need this book to do, but the question is, what does your kid need to be stronger at?
Mm-hmm.
And so feed that.
I want to add one genre that we should have mentioned because we all grew up on it, and our grandfather continues to nonstop.
I think Nate's been here before.
Has he?
Yeah,
but do it. Missionary biographies, stories of saints before.
Yeah,
those are that is great roughage material, because even when it's like, we don't agree with that person's theology, or we don't agree with this,
or
we don't
great literature,
or it's downright poor literature in other cases, it doesn't matter, because that in that category of teaching what's useful, and honoring what's honorable. It does those things. It teaches your kids to.
And just the category of being someone who might have to die for what you believe is a great one for little guys, little guys to realize, oh, wait, they died.
I mean, especially right now, there's so many people that are ready to phone in everything they ever thought, just as long as they're safe.
Yeah.
And so having your kids grow up on stories where bravery and sacrifice are a thing matters.
And where they honor that, like they honor the fact that people
loyalty to something outside your own personal comfort
is worth something.
Yeah.
Your whole family feels like it's worth something.
Yeah.
I remember I have a lot of experiences with reading a book that I really loved and then binging on the rest of that author's work and finding out like, oh, that was horrible.
Yeah.
H. Rider Haggard.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I love King Solomon's Mines. And so now I'm going to read She.
Oh, yeah.
Return of She. Like, what on earth is this nonsense?
I did
but
that.
Speaking of that, Buchan. You should have Buchan.
Oh, yeah,
around.
Buchan,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, Buchan.
Buchan's good to have on the
Absolutely.
shelves for the times when people are bored.
You know, that actually is a great reminder because I should throw those at some of my children right now.
Yeah.
They're fantastic.
They
Yeah.
are really
make
good.
sure that I have all those.
Soul food being cooked right now.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
Nate's mind.
39 Steps, Green Mantle.
Green
There's
Mantle is
Mr.
just
Standfast.
Mr. Standfast. But Green
Those are
Mantle
so
is,
good.
I think,
Prester John, right?
yep. But
Yeah.
Green Mantle is where he peaks, I think.
Yeah.
Is that 8-year-old level? Can I
No.
read that
No,
You
out
can
loud?
read it aloud.
You could read it aloud. It's
Okay.
a total thriller.
39
I mean, there are
steps you
kids.
could read aloud and
Okay.
see how your 8-year-old
Yeah.
handles it.
Awesome.
But it's definitely not a here.
Right.
You'll understand the First World War all by yourself.
You'll totally understand.
He's still
this.
into the Spanish-American War. Where did that happen?
This is
In
when
Spain or America?
I have one who is really into military things also, but we bought
Yeah.
him like a map of the battles of the War for Independence, and he would pore over that forever. This is the same person who's deeply committed to Calvin and Hobbes and nothing else. So you really wonder what's going on in there.
Visual learner.
Well, just what interests you is what.
Looking at stuff.
Yeah, kind of a Well, he does read also,
Yeah, I'm just saying maps and Calvin and Hobbes. What do they have in common?
Yeah. Okay. My kids have also liked
Drawings.
the Mysterious Benedict Society.
Yeah.
They've enjoyed
like
that.
that.
And those are some big ones.
Mm-hmm.
A number of, I'm trying to think of series because that's the thing that's so relieving to find out about series.
Well, obviously, I mean,
Nate's stuff.
Nate's stuff.
Yeah.
Oh.
Read all of my books.
I do actually want to say this. Nate's books are a great example of books that get this treatment in our house. When you're buying books for your kids, if you actually want your kids to read books and you want your kids to love reading books, don't be uptight and shrill about your kids reading books. Like if they take a book to sit in a tree and read it, they bring it in the car and then they drop it and someone steps on it, the cover gets ripped off. Deal with it. They're consuming the literature. And I think that is where many parents go really wrong, is being so uptight about that, like $10 investment, that acting like the book itself is why you have it, when it's actually the kids learning things from it. So with your books, I buy them all the time. Whenever I see extra ones, I buy them. We probably have like 35 of them, all in various phases of disrepute, because they just get thrashed and read and left here and left there. And then eventually I throw them away when I'm like, well, this is too beat up now. Moving on.
It is funny. I get rebuked often by moms for not having written enough books. And I feel like as I finish my 13th novel,
Like, have I not done my part?
Like, come on. I mean,
That's a lot of novels.
After 13, you can start over again. It's okay. Like, as a reader,
yeah, do it
you
loud.
can start again.
Yeah, I would say Narnia is another one that we have. We probably have like 5 complete sets of at least of the Narnia
And everybody
books, and I
should
just
have
let
read
them go.
Narnia a lot of times by the
Right.
time they're done with their childhood. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's one that needs to
And the
stay just in
audio
circulation.
On those things, I think the audio, it's great to start kids on the audio, so long as, because we actually enjoyed the Focus on the Family audio versions of Narnia before they read it, because it leaves just enough out that when they read the book, they're like, this is way better than they notice that but they love it. The basics are there in the audio, but when they read the books themselves, they're like vastly
also
superior.
something, I mean, you can listen to the dramatized versions of Narnia Chronicles without going crazy on a road trip, but only so much Adventures in Odyssey before
Yeah.
before I don't want to hear more
I
Adventures in
can't
Odyssey.
take an Adventures in Odyssey.
Oh, really?
And
I
James
enjoyed
Harriet.
them. But
James Harriet is
We've done Clive Cussler honestly.
Oh, really?
Wow.
But James Harriet is a good. That's a good one for tons of kids' books, also.
Okay, yeah.
But also,
James
it's fun
Harriet.
in audio.
Yeah.
Yeah, we like those.
I did Amazing Tales for Making Men Out of Boys, which is a pretty good
I
one.
bought that off of your recommend.
Okay, it was great. It was much harder than I thought it was going to be, but man, the stories are good, and it's fun because you can buy the Wikipedia version of those where the author just wrote basically based off Wikipedia, or you can write a real author writing about them, and the two are very different.
The two are different. So we've been told to list all the titles that we mentioned in our show notes. I don't know how on earth that's possible for this one.
We're gonna do it though because
I don't know that we can for this one.
You don't think we can?
There's too many. I mean, you can try. I'm not going to try.
Let's just see how many authors we can mention real fast now.
You could have the bad list, all the ones we give
the baddies.
No stars on Yelp.
No stars for the mouse dancer.
Angelina Ballerina
Whichever corrupt
takes it in the teeth.
The corrupt mouse. We don't like her.
Speaking of mice, E.B. White.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh,
Stuart Little.
We read Stuart
amazing.
Little aloud, and wait, yes, it was Stuart Little. We read it aloud and couldn't believe what a little turkey he is throughout it. and it's funny because I had not a recollection of that as a child.
Well, I think people mix up Ralph S. Mouse and Stuart Little, and then
the Ralph S. Mouse is
Cleary.
That's Clary, Beverly Clary.
Yeah. And then there's which one's got the motorcycle and the ping pong
we
helmet?
love Hank the Cow Dog.
Hank the Cow Dog is fun.
Yeah, Ralph
You
S.
guys
Mouse
listen.
is the
You
one I like.
listen to Hank the Cow Dog, don't you?
I don't know that we've started. I think we have to.
There's a whole. There are Hank the Cow Dogs read by the author.
And they're so funny.
They're so funny. And my little boys deeply love Hank the Cow Dog. Yeah,
I'm writing it down.
And actually,
at least this title.
And actually, Hank the Cow Dog is in fact one that, as a parent, you find yourself sniggering along when you're listening. You know, you're hearing them listen to it, but it's cracking you up also because it is well done.
And then I feel like Patrick McManus, people should be introduced to.
Yes. So Patrick McManus for me is a counterpoint to P.G. Wodehouse. You're reading for character work and hilarious prose, but he, unlike Wodehouse, he goes far more with action comedy. And he does some amazing impressionistic descriptions of action sequences.
Nothing will ever like the first deer. The first deer is just so magnificent.
With the deer coming alive on the back of his bike
and pedaling down the
excellent. Oh my word.
That is
Patrick
one of the
McManus
best.
has some pretty fantastic
When I was a kid, major roughage was Jim Keelguard dog stories. You know, I think they're
No, I don't know that.
Those? Okay, well, he wrote a ton of dog stories, and I hope now that they're not way worse than my fourth grade self remembers. But I mean, the dog fought the coyote, so I don't know what more you'd want.
Well, what about Booth Tarkington? That's a throwback. Because
actually, that's good because I was going to mention this to you, Brian. In terms of things
PC.
out of copyright.
Yeah,
some Penrod.
Penrod and Sam is not politically correct, but there are just some genius moments in there.
Lena recently read it, and it has led to her often saying, "Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful."
There's just some great stuff in there.
Awesome.
Yeah, Penrod.
Yeah.
And given that it probably is out of copyright, I think we should do some editions.
Yeah,
way. We should print some editions of those.
Do we need to mess with any of the things that are super not PC?
Probably. Yeah.
Some of them are significant, I think.
We could just take out the racisms.
Right. Let's take out all racism. No need to read that just because it's in a good book.
Well, we'll see. It will still be politically incorrect.
Oh, I loved those. I laughed.
But those are fantastic books.
Around the dinner table.
My older kids have all read Peace Like a River. That's an example of one that they all love it, but it's not a super lightweight book, but they love it. But when they read other Leaf Angers, we've had a lot of conversation about why are his other books just nowhere near as good as I don't believe they are, but my kids don't either. You know, like Peace Like a River, I think the story is so compelling and his writing is as good in other books, but it falls flat somehow. But that's been a thing that with my teenagers, we'll talk about that kind of thing. But I'm just trying to stay educated to keep up with them in the lit conversations. Not easy, actually.
So what was I going to give my kids when I get home? Bucking.
Yep.
Yeah, it was bucking.
Do some bucking. Yeah. And I'm going to hand one kid The Big Sleep.
There's one author that I like, Elizabeth Marie Pope. That's like a younger girl's, probably like 4th, 5th grade, somewhere in there, that age range. She only wrote 2 books, though, Sherwood Ring and the Perilous Guard, those two. But they're both good. And they're also, I think why I like them so much is that they're not at all culturally hip. Like they are not cool in a lot of ways, but they're great. They're like, it's like low level. It's not like they're shocking or, they're just, it's like a low level kind of literature, except for they're fun stories and they lean against the female hero who doesn't need a man, they just lean against a lot of things that now it's hard to find things that have strong girl characters that aren't anti-boy characters.
Yeah, we actually were just talking about the strong female protagonist.
That released today, that episode.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, now that we're on this podcast, it didn't.
Oh, has not released on your podcast.
No, what I mean is like, you say it released today, but by the time this releases...
It was the last episode or something.
See, this is what I struggle with every time I read sci-fi novels.
Well,
yes.
the point
how
is...
a strong female protagonist doesn't have to be. It's not feminism.
No, and in the Sherwood Ring, they had the part of the thing that I enjoy about it is there is a romance in it from a very strong and smart female character. And a guy who really likes her and is still trying to outsmart her. Like it's like a hilarious. It is great because it allows for a strong female character within the context of men enjoying that and not letting it dominate them either, not being intimidated by it. And it's just, I like that.
There we go. I think we've gone for a while.
Yeah, I think
we can wrap it on up.
Gone all the way around the bend.
Thanks for having us on What Have You.
Yeah, thanks for coming, guys.
We're happy to have you on Stories or Soul Food. So
yeah,
well,
perfect. Next time
it'll just be who releases
We'll
it
have you
first.
come get in the car and give your recipe tips
on our podcast.
So,
yeah, we'll come do recipe tips.
Yeah,
soon. I'll talk to you about meatloaf.
Housekeeping deets, meatloaf.
Yes.
I don't think we've done a What Have You on meatloaf yet. So
I remember you sinning a lot about meatloaf.
I did.
That was me as well.
And I basically wrote home,
which I never understood because it was amazing.
Well, when we drove by a childhood friend's house, and I pointed it out to my children as the place I first obeyed about meatloaf, and it was because I went to their house after school, and their mom made meatloaf, and it was worse meatloaf than I'd ever seen in my life because it was topped off.
We're turning this into a regular What Have You.
It was topped off with American cheese. But somehow I knew in my heart that this was it. It was like, this is the time when you have to do it without a fuss. This is it, Rachel, because you can't do it here. You can't be the guest that won't do it. But I went home with so much pride. I was just so full of myself. I ate the meatloaf.
Well, I'm getting a phone call from my heating contractor, which I need to take. So,
guys, we're done.
All right.
See you. Thanks all
later.
around.
Bye-bye.